topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. It's Tuesday, and I'm excited to be here with y'all. So I want to share a kind of story. So I usually walk at a nearby trail, beautiful trail, and especially with autumn being here and during the fall, all the leaves have fallen, and then there are some of those trees which have some of those leaves just kind of hanging out there and all that beautiful colors. So one of my neighbors, I did not know she was my neighbor. So usually, I'm not sure about y'all, but you have trail buddies in the sense that you see some people quite often and you wave at them, wish them good morning. And similarly, this is one of the persons, her name's Ina, beautiful person, wave goodbye and say morning and say have a good day and all of that good stuff. And today she stopped by and she told me she was so thrilled to share that she's one of my neighbors and I didn't even know. And just the joy on her face that she had made the connection just made my day. So think about it, bring that kindness to people. Just taking a moment, taking a minute, and making that connection can go such a long way. I was delighted in the morning and it just made for a beautiful, beautiful start to the day. And I want to thank each and every one of you who have got our books. We have several books, but especially we recommend The Entrepreneur's Garden and Expert to Influencer because those books will provide you with a lot of value. Not only that, as you purchase those, it helps our listeners as well because some of our listeners are from kiva.org and we share partial proceeds from that with kiva.org. So thank you. And also just want to share, I am in the process of writing another book. So I'll be sharing more about that as time passes. And let's bring in our guest. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning. And I want to thank you for your services because it's because of heroes like you that we celebrate our freedom and we have this beautiful country where we have the democracy. So, Christopher, we get started from childhood. And do you remember a moment or a person that left a positive mark on you?
Yes. Mr. Bub Akins I went to boarding school growing up, named Milton Hershey School. And I had a house parent. His name was Bub Akins. And Bub basically taught me that there's no need to complain. And I went up to him and I said, hey, I don't really like doing this job that you had me doing. And it was buffing the laundry room floor. He was like, well, guess what? You're not here to like things. You're here just to get things done. Everyone has a job here. and you have to contribute. And I was like, oh, okay. Basically, stop complaining and add value to the people that are around you. And everyone's responsible for their share of this collective experience.
Mm, that's such a powerful story. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are going to be scratching their head and thinking, Christopher, the question that's probably coming to everybody's minds, because I don't know about you, sometimes, at least including myself, I've heard a lot of people saying that if the weather gets too hot, oh, it's hot. If it gets too cold, we say it's too cold. So not sure if that would fall in the complaining category, or I hear people complaining about things everywhere. Like it's almost, it has become a part of our social fabric. So what would you say to our listeners?
I would say that I think the thing that Bub was trying to get me to understand is because he was a cook,
Mm,
he was an army chef. You know, you can imagine it's always hot in the kitchen, right?
mm-hmm,
Right. You know, when he was making food for hundreds or thousands of people.
mm,
So I'm sure his muscles were always tired. He was always sore. It was always hot. He was probably always dehydrated. And I think what he was getting me to understand is that there's many cooks in his kitchen all working together. And if you get into the business of complaining, you're going to be bringing everyone else's mood down.
mm-hmm.
So be mindful of your audience because we have to keep everyone's spirits high. And, you know, there's an old adage if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah. And
And
it's a very, very powerful adage that if you're down, don't bring everybody else down. And that makes perfect sense. So definitely that's a very profound lesson to learn at a young age. So as you grew, how did you move into, or how did you get attracted, or how did you take the directions to going and joining Navy?
you know, now that we're having this conversation, I probably think Bub had a lot to do with that, sort of the way that he carried himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he was already preparing me psychologically with always making sure I was on time, always making sure I was working hard, always making sure that I was disciplined. So when I left boarding school, I went to college. And at college, there was basically no structure. And so I sort of floundered inside of an environment where there was no structure. At boarding school, of course, there was a place that um, I never really enjoyed. Yet as I got older, I appreciated. So when I got an opportunity to go into the military and I got back in the structure, it was very easy for me to cope and to
Mm,
relate because I had already been in sort of a fixed structure, right? There was what you call imposed discipline.
right, right.
And since I grew up underneath that type of structure as a child, it made it very easy for me to be in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because I signed up for it, as opposed to my grandmother putting me there without my permission,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was okay with it. So I had already learned the lessons of no complaining, no moaning, no whining.
Mm,
So I was always someone who was lifting everyone's spirits.
mm-hmm.
And I already understood consequences because when I went to boarding school, if you were to get out of line, meaning if you were to do something that's unexpected and disapproved of, there was always a consequence that was relative to your measure of rebellion. And
Mm-hmm.
so the purpose of that was to really get you to understand that when you do this, you get that. And when you do that, you get this. So if you do things that are constructive, you're going to get bigger opportunities and have more freedoms. And
Mhm.
if you do things that are deconstructive, then you're going to get less opportunities.
Very true. So this is one side of the coin. And if we were to have a difficult conversation in the sense that now, as we see, as the current trends or the current winds are blowing, usually it is recommended, especially with mental health and mental well being, that if you are not feeling well, so tell us, like, because feeling not well mentally and not feeling well physically, they're both on the par. You're not feeling well, you're not feeling well. So, how can our audience differentiate between the true times, like, I'm not feeling well, I need to seek help, I need to do something about it, versus knowing that it's just complaining?
Yeah, I think um, as a professional who works with people who have been through difficult things, different levels of trauma, different levels of confusion, high states of anxiety, and a lot of physical discomfort, I think that if I were to give advice to people, I'd say find one person that you really trust and begin to share with them what you're going through.
Hmm.
Because if you keep things inside, and I had to learn this the hard way, they amplify. So, meaning if you're stressed on Monday and something's really bothering you in your workspace or in your family life, and you swallow it and move on to Tuesday, well, the same thing is still going to be present in your environment. And well, now Monday and Tuesday have gone into Wednesday, and then it's this level of accumulation that causes challenges. And I would say the most important thing to do is to engage in two versions of honesty. One, be extremely honest with yourself
Hmm.
about what's actually happening.
Right.
And things that are out of your control, which I had to learn in boarding school, which I had to learn in the military, which I had to learn as an entrepreneur. Things that are out of your control are out of your control. And so, um, if you're having a problem with how things are being handled, then you're going to have to communicate clearly to either someone who is above you that can change the circumstance, or you're going to have to find a professional that you can speak to, or you're going to have to find a dear friend and someone you trust to be able to share your objections and how these
Abs-
things are bothering you.
right.
And if you're
And
willing to do that, you're
yeah.
you're you're telling the universe that you're willing to be receptive and let other people in. And I think that's probably the biggest step or the first step that someone could take.
Hmm. And that's the distinction between not feeling well and complaining. Because when we are talking about over here that don't complain, it doesn't mean that being mentally tough means that you're not feeling well and you're not seeking help. So that's an important distinction to draw. Christopher, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm wherever you're overwhelmed, you have to be honest with yourself about the level of overwhelm that you're dealing with. So let's say, for instance, your anxiety is a 10 out of 10. Well, it doesn't get any higher than that. So that means if your anxiety is a 10 out of 10, that means there's something going on either inside of you or outside of you where you feel extremely overwhelmed by either your internal environment or your external environment. And you have to invite someone in to that experience. And simply getting things off your chest can be very productive.
Hmm. So now, thank you for sharing that. And now going back to your journey, tell us, what did it take? So how did you transfer from military into Navy, and how did you become part of that 1%, right? Because based on what you have shared, that Navy SEALs make up less than 1% of the active duty Navy. So how did your journey transpire, and what did you learn along the way?
Um, what did I learn? I think there's a lot of lessons, and um, I think at the time, what I was learning is different than what I've learned in retrospect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you're a child, I went to boarding school when I was 7 years old, and I
Mm-hmm.
left when I was 17. So when you're a child, then you're institutionalized. And so everyone understands who's listening, this wasn't an actual institution. I'm calling it an institution because it was an institution of learning, right? Um, you take on ideals and ideas when you're in a precognitive state of function and you don't really actually understand the fullness of what those things mean. And so when I was in the military, I didn't understand completely what some of the older guys, some of the leaders in SEAL training, the instructors, and what the leaders at the SEAL team that I was at SEAL Team 5. I didn't fully understand the depth of what they were talking about. I was very young, and so I took on ideals and strategies that were limiting beliefs that I created to try to cope and fit in with the environment that was available in SEAL teams. And so one of those things is work hard and play harder. Well, when I was 22, I took work hard and play harder to mean like you go to work, you give everything you got, and then when you go out socially and you party, you do the same thing.
Mm.
And as I look back, because this morning I was writing down notes of, things that we would talk about. And the thing that struck me is when work hard but play harder came out. And I realized what they really meant was find something you're passionate about after work and put all your heart into that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it in the literal sense of work hard and play hard in relationship to partying. And I don't think the older guys meant that because the older guys weren't out drinking
Mm-hmm.
every single night after work. And so in retrospect, what I've learned by play hard is find something that you're passionate about and pour all your heart into it that's the opposite and has nothing to do with your actual profession. And then by doing so, you'll have a few different passions. The other thing that I think is super important is find something that you love. Like when I was in SEAL training and I was in the SEAL teams, one, I'm someone who's extremely uncomfortable. I'm very comfortable with the unknown. And so find things that are difficult and put yourself in the middle of those things and learn to let go and learn from what the moment is attempting to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
Another important thing for me in SEAL training and in the SEAL teams is you have to be comfortable with discomfort. And discomfort should never be a deterrent from you pouring in all of your heart into what you're doing. And so the more uncomfortable you are, the more you're learning. The less comfortable you are, the less you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so be comfortable with discomfort, be comfortable with pain. Because if you're a pleasure seeker, if there isn't pleasure available to you in that moment, you think you're bored by life. And when people are bored, what do? They do things many times that are non-productive. And so I like to do things that are uncomfortable. So I keep a little bit of discomfort in my life at all times.
Well, that's very powerful, Christopher. And here's the thing, that people run away from discomfort, most of the people. So, what you have shared is that when you lean into discomfort and lean into that fear, becoming familiar with the fear of failure, with the fear of the unknown, and that's where the growth happens. It's not just a wall, it's a doorway to different opportunities that life can bring you. So, how can somebody go from that discomfort, like, okay, I just don't want to do, to being comfortable with discomfort and building that mental toughness and resilience?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was in boarding school, part of the process was all of the student homes were on a dairy farm. And so at 13, 14 years old, I was getting up and going to barn and shoveling
Hmm.
manure and
Hmm.
milking cows and working in the milk room and helping to bring calves, baby cows into the world. And you're getting up early. And in Pennsylvania, the fall and the winter are very cold, right?
Yeah.
So when you go down the barn, the windows are open. There's no closed windows in the barn. Like it's freezing in there. And so you have to learn. I had to learn to enjoy the things that are uncomfortable constantly. So for someone who doesn't have that, who doesn't have an early morning barn routine, or lives in a temperate climate and you don't have the cold, I say if it's winter time and you get an opportunity to go on vacation, and choose a place that's cold or choose a place that's super, super hot, right? And rather than turn on the air conditioning, drive to work or be on vacation where it's really cold or super, super hot. So, for instance, I was recently at Penn State University, and I go up there and I work with the wrestling teams up there. They have two teams. They have the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and they have the Penn State College Wrestlers. And it was cold and it was windy, and I had a chance to, bundle myself up perfectly. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to go for a walk. It's cold and it's windy out. I'm not going to put much on because I haven't been in the cold recently. And I wanted to have that discomfort. I wanted to be in that. And so I went for a 20-minute walk in the cold and the wind. And it was very uncomfortable. And then when I got inside the building, I could appreciate the warmth and the coziness that was in the wrestling room. And so that's a strategy of something that I will do on a semi-regular basis to get myself uncomfortable, right?
Hmm.
Like I like to get into the sauna. And when you're in the sauna, there's a point where you get in and you're like, "Oh, this is kind of hot." And then there's a moment when you're in the sauna where you're like, "Oh, this is a little too much." And whenever I have that feeling, that experience, that's when I say to myself, "Okay, you're going to stay a few more minutes." Do I have to stay an hour? No. Do I have to stay 30 minutes? No. All I need to do is stay a few more minutes past the place where I start to feel uncomfortable. And then I know that I'm creating really positive stress for my body. The difference here is this. if I was in the SEAL teams and I was in SEAL training, well, when we got uncomfortable, they would keep us in that discomfort for hours. Okay. No one needs to do that in order to build inner strength or to build self esteem. Yet, the moment you feel uncomfortable, staying a few minutes beyond that discomfort is really, really valuable because guess what? You're going to be on plane rides, meaning you're going to be on flights, you're going to be on trains, you're going to be in taxis, you're going to be in places where it's rainy and it's muddy and it's dirty. And if you're testing yourself a little bit every day, when you get in those situations, it never pulls you out of your center because you're already used to a little bit of discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's very powerful. And this goes back to the mindfulness and neuro techniques because just like you have to go to the gym and then slowly increase the amount of weights that you can lift, similarly is the mental resilience, is putting yourself, and this goes back again to the exposure to fear, that best way to overcome a fear is being exposed to it. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, it doesn't have to be hours. It can be done in baby steps. So it could be incremental goals, 0 to 5%, 5 to 10%. And just like the interest compounds, you would see that bounce back ratio from the tough times will be shorter, and finding that ability to cope with different situations. So now this is again, I want to lean in. You mentioned that you went for a walk. So it's a choice. It's a decision. And so many times what happens is that so many of my clients and come across so many different people are hesitant to make decisions versus like when you were a part of a Navy SEAL. I mean, you were in a situations probably like, life or death or whatever, different scenarios or different backgrounds. There can be so many life threatening, and even if it may not be life threatening, it can be like, let's say, for us who are civilians, there is still high stakes decisions like, okay, whether to something like you mentioned that, something's not right. How do I go about it? Do I have that tough conversation? I don't have that tough conversation. Or, okay, I'm struggling in this job. I don't like this job. Shall I, like in the job market is bad. Shall I go out and just go after something that I want to do? And so many times what happens is that people linger in that state of overthinking and analysis paralysis, that they stay in mediocrity, and going from that ordinary to becoming extraordinary, that little piece, that extra is missing. So what can you share from your experience that will help people to make those, starting from small decisions to high stakes decisions?
When you go into SEAL training, it's a great question. And you walk through the corridor and you get out into what's called the PT area. It's this black top section.
Mm-hmm.
Off to your left is a building, and there's a sign up there, and it's in blue and yellow letters. Okay. Actually, it's in blue letters with a yellow background. And it says, "The only easy day was yesterday." And when you see that sign, you start to understand very quickly that every day they're going to pile on a little more stress, right? They're going to make it a little more difficult. And for most people, it's a 9-month to year-long program. I know for me, it was about a 1.5-year long program. So when you have that mindset and they're direct and upfront and you know what to expect, I think it's easier to be able to cope with increased amounts of difficulty every single day. And it comes back to something we started to talk about a little bit earlier. And I think people have to understand that life is always changing. Okay. And that growth is meant to have some difficulty in it. And if you're looking to have a good time all the time, then you're missing out on the opportunity to understand that a real good time is filled with many phases. And the first phase is ignorance. Okay. I was ignorant in the sense that I heard about SEAL training through a biannual magazine. And my favorite sport growing up was track and field and cross country and swimming. So when I saw these guys on the front cover of this magazine running down the beach with telephone poles over their shoulders, 7 guys to a telephone pole right next to the ocean, like everything came together for me. But what I never really considered was how much and how often we were going to be doing things that were difficult.
Mm.
And so every exercise in SEAL training has some level of difficulty to it. And when you refuse to do your research, and meaning ask questions to other professionals, to other entrepreneurs, to other seekers about what it is you want to get into, you're going in there blind. And because I was comfortable with the unknown, I never asked enough questions. And because of my lack of investigation, I think SEAL training in a certain way was a little bit more difficult for me in the beginning because I was unprepared when I showed up.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone else showed up pretty fit. Okay. I showed up to SEAL training, no working out before I got there.
Mm.
So my first 10, 11, 12 weeks, I was suffering. Like
Mm-hmm.
I swam enough to pass the test. I ran enough to pass the test. I did enough push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups to pass the test. But I never really got into that grinding mindset because I never investigated or asked anyone, hey, you're a Navy SEAL or you've been through SEAL training. What should I expect?
Mm-hmm.
And so I showed up unprepared. And I think if you're that type of person like me, it would behoove you to at least get familiar with what the expectations are and never idealize a photo, right?
Right.
Without figuring out what you're really getting into. And I had no idea what I was really getting into. I saw the movie, Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen, and but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I really understood the energetic demands of what was going on. So the lesson there for me, and the walk away is move out of ignorance by getting informed and be well informed, right? Call
Right.
people up who have attempted to do the thing that you're attempting. Ask yourself the deeper questions. Is this going to be fun for me? Is this going to be something that I actually love? Is this something that I enjoy? Because if you ask those deeper questions of yourself, you're going to find out really quickly if it's something that resonates with you, because anything you devote your life to is your time. And as you know, time is a very precious commodity. But and a lot of people think that time is the most precious commodity. But in my belief, I believe that love is the most precious commodity. And if I'm doing something that I love, then my time can never be wasted.
Mm-hmm. Because that is the precious time that you look out for and time that you cherish. So you brought up a really good point, and as the Pareto's law goes, it's 80% preparation and 20% execution. So it's important that if you're prepared, then you can get in that mindset. And if you're in that mindset, then another thing that you brought up was if you love what you do. So it goes back to leading with purpose and knowing your why. If you know your why, so for me, it's about impacting other people and helping other people. And that's what got me moving from corporate into coaching arena. And there are unknowns. There are times as an entrepreneur when you don't know what's going to come next. And that's where knowing your why helps you get through your what and the how, because sometimes you can be best informed and yet the how may be very different than what you expected. So it's going back to what you said is that love is most important. If you love what you do, then it will pull you through the grind and the difficult times. So you also mentioned that the stress leaves a lot of imprints in the body as well. So can you share what you mean by that and how can people leverage that to heal themselves?
Yeah. Stress. There's two basic types of stress. I mean, it's interesting to me that everyone that's an adult is aware that stress is something that impacts them.
Mm-hmm,
And people basically know two things: there's positive stress and there's negative stress, right?
mm-hmm,
And that's the very beginning to that doorway. And the thing about stress imprints is that you need an intense amount of unresolved stress in order to create a tiny bit of physical tension. So think about that. You need a
mm-hmm,
massive amount of unresolved stress to transform into a tiny bit of physical tension.
mm-hmm.
Well, when you think about, people who are white collar workers, right? They sit on their butts all day, right?
Right.
And you think about blue collar workers, well, they're out moving all day, right? And
Mm-hmm,
so when you're a white collar worker and you're sitting on your butt 14, 16 hours a day, well, guess what happens year after year, decade after decade? Your body starts to hold a massive amount of tension. And
mm-hmm,
you need a massive amount of tension to create a tiny bit of distortion. And distortion is what creates pain, right?
mm-hmm,
So if you look at emotional, we started the conversation off today sort of with some questions around mental wellness, right?
mm-hmm,
And emotional wellness. Well, in order to be mentally or emotionally unwell, you have to have mental pain or emotional pain.
mm-hmm,
In order to have physical pain like joint pain, or I woke up today and my neck is stiff, or my back is tight, or the top of my foot is uncomfortable when I put too much weight on my right leg, like whatever level of physical, emotional, or psychological or energetic discomfort, right?
mm-hmm,
People wake up and they feel exhausted and they have to get out of bed because they have work. Well, guess what? That's energetic pain, right? When you wake up and your eyes are super, super heavy and you're reaching for that snooze button 3 or 4 more times.
mm-hmm,
Well, in order to get to that place, if we reverse engineer it, what's the thing that we have to have first? We have to have a massive amount of stress in order to get to a tiny bit of distortion that creates discomfort. And so these imprints, you have to figure out what sort of really works for you in order to dissolve imprints. Some people, they're into breath work, and breath work is their thing. They breathe, they light up their cells, they get very energetic, and they feel better. Other people are more comfortable with something like sound healing. Other people are going to be more comfortable with yoga and Pilates.
mm-hmm,
Other people are going to be more comfortable with meditation. And you
mm-hmm,
got to really figure out like what's more of your go-to. Are you a movement-based person? Are you a breathwork person? Are you a vibrational healing person? Or are you a meditation type person? And get involved in some way in the place where you're comfortable. Like you'll find a lot of meditators. You're never going to find those people at the gym. You can find a lot of people that go to the gym every day. You're never going to find them in a yoga class.
Mhm.
You got people to go to yoga class. You're never going to find them in a breathwork class, right? And yet it's more likely that they would do that because they're more into Eastern practice. But what I would say is be aware of what it is you like to do, and then find someone in the world who's really good at one of those disciplines. Okay. Top notch, right? Like top 5 on the planet, or at least someone who knows more than you do, and get involved in shedding and reducing your lifetime accumulated stress loads, or at least be consistent enough to deal with your daily accumulated stress.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Very
if
powerful.
Yeah, because if you continue to avoid dealing with your daily accumulated stress, that's going to eventually turn into some level of discomfort or pain or dis-ease, or, worst case scenario, some very complex disease. And so if you stay on top of it on a semi-consistent basis and it works for your lifestyle, you need to be able to be honest with yourself, one, about the amount of stress that you're
Right.
under on a daily basis. And then the way you're going to know whether or not you're being successful is when you wake up the morning. If you wake up tired, you're failing at reducing your daily accumulated stress. If you
Yep.
wake up and you're refreshed, you're winning at dealing with your daily accumulated stress, which means you have to have a lifestyle that promotes self-healing.
Mm-hmm. So the key is what I'm hearing is that figure out what works for you,
Figure,
and
yeah,
then follow that. And then secondly, the key is that don't wait like, oh, I'm going to go on vacation or I'm going to do this in 2 months' time. Involve yourself in day-to-day activities, and whether it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, wherever, start out small and do that reset every single day. So, given all of this, Christopher, share with our listeners a little bit about your book. Where can they connect with you? How can they find you?
the name of my book is called Free for Life: A
Mm-hmm.
U.S. Navy SEAL's Path to Inner Freedom and Outer Peace. Meaning that when you have attained inner freedom, you're at peace with everything that's going on outside of you. Okay. Meaning you're never complaining or whining or moaning or interceding into other people's lives with judgment or criticism or disapproval. You're okay with everyone's level of evolution at the pace that they want to go, right?
Right.
And you can easily find my book on my website at truebodyintelligence.com. If you like to be inspired each day, or you want a little hit of education around stress, you can follow me on Instagram at Christopher Lee Maher, Maher. And every other day, I always post something that's 30 to 60 seconds long to help continue to inform and educate you on some level of stress and some type of action that you can take that will help you reduce your daily accumulated stress. And almost all the advice that I give never requires you to spend any money. And in a economy that's had a downward spiral, I think it's important to be able to give people solutions and action oriented steps that they can take to, at least, at the very least, to question themselves around what it is they're doing to manage their lifestyle, either positively or negatively.
Absolutely. And I'm positive that people are definitely going to seek you out. Thank you so much for sharing these powerful nuggets, your story, and insights. We appreciate you joining us today. And thank you, dear audience and listeners, for joining us and for being part of our show, because without you, the show would not be possible. Reach out to us, let us know how can we support you, whose stories you'd like to listen to, and how can we help you live the life you deserve and want. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.